There are moments in a person's life that divide everything into before and after. I'd had a few of them. The day my father's ship didn't come back from a run. The morning I decided the legal side of cargo transport wasn't paying enough to justify the boredom. The night the wandering debt hit the canopy of Thessera Vex, and I discovered that the universe had a very specific sense of humor about my life choices. I didn't know, the morning after the storm, that I was standing at the edge of another one. I just knew that Lyra had woken up before dawn, which was not unusual, that she had sat watching me sleep for what felt like a long time before I opened my eyes, which was slightly unusual, and that when I looked at her in the gray pre-dawn light, something in her expression was different from every other morning we had shared on this planet. She had made a decision overnight. I could see it the way you sometimes see a decision on a person's face before they've said a word. A settling, a resolve, the particular stillness of someone who has argued with themselves for a long time and finally, quietly, chosen a side. She said my name, just that, Cole, in her accent that still softened the consonants in a way I'd stopped noticing and started simply hearing as her voice. Then she stood, picked up her spear, and moved to the shelter entrance. Looked back at me, waited. I pulled on my jacket and followed her into the crystalline post-storm morning without asking where we were going. Some invitations don't need words. She took me deeper into the jungle than I'd been before. Not the wreckage field. We moved away from that, past the perimeter I had unconsciously established as the boundary of our territory, into older and denser growth, where the trees were wider around than the wandering debt and their canopy, so thick overhead that the morning light came through in narrow golden shafts, each one so precise and vertical it looked architectural. The ground underfoot was soft and dark, with centuries of fallen leaves, compressed into something between soil and moss, completely silent under our feet. No crunch, no snap, just the yielding give of something very old and very deep. Lyra moved through it the way she moved through everything, with absolute certainty, no hesitation, the unhurried confidence of someone who has walked this path so many times it lives in her body rather than her memory. She didn't check her direction, didn't slow at junctions, just moved. And I followed, and the jungle closed behind us like water. The smell changed as we went deeper. The thick, green, living smell of the outer jungle, all chlorophyll and damp earth, and the faint sweetness of the fast-growing vines, gradually gave way to something older and cooler and more mineral. Stone, I thought at first. And then, underneath the stone smell, something else. Something faintly electric, like the air before the storm, but quieter and more constant, as if whatever produced it had been producing it for a very long time and had no intention of stopping. I noticed the birds had gone quiet again. Not the predator nearby silent from those first terrifying days. This was different, respectful almost, like the jungle was observing something. Then Lyra stopped, and I looked up, and everything thought I knew about Thessera Vex stopped being enough. It rose from the jungle floor the way mountains rise, with the absolute authority of something that has simply always been there and intends to continue being there long after everything around it has come and gone. Stone. But not any stone I recognized. A deep gray-green material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Surface so smooth it looked polished even under centuries of vine growth and moss and the patient work of Vex's insistent, relentless jungle. Massive. The smallest visible archway was 15 meters high at least. Its curve so perfect it hurt something in the mathematical part of my brain that recognized precision. It had no business existing this far from any known civilization. Symbols covered every surface, not carved, grown into the stone somehow, as if they had formed from within rather than been applied from without. They glowed, faintly, steadily, with a deep green bioluminescent light that pulsed so slowly it was almost imperceptible. Once every 4 or 5 seconds, a rhythm so close to a heartbeat that it had to actively remind myself it was the stone. I stood at the threshold of something that had no right to exist and tried to find a category for it in everything I knew about the universe. I couldn't. Human civilization, our oldest structures, our most ancient ruins, nothing came close to the age I felt radiating from this place. The Veil, whose history stretched back farther than ours, had seen their architecture in briefings, in propaganda, in the occasional intercepted cultural transmission. Nothing like this. Nothing with this weight, this stillness, this sense of something so old that the word old had stopped being adequate. I turned to Lyra. She was watching me with those amber eyes, quiet, careful, reading my face the way she always did. But underneath the watchfulness was something else, something exposed and waiting. The expression of someone who has shown another person the most important thing in their life and is waiting to find out what they think of it. How long? I asked. 2 words, but she had enough of my language by now. She looked at the structure, then back at me, and said a word in Kale that I knew. We'd added it to our wall weeks ago, at her insistence, though I hadn't understood why it mattered so much to her at the time. Always. It had always been here. She led me inside. The interior was vast and cool, and humming was something I felt more than heard. A low, constant vibration at the very edge of perception, like standing near enormous machinery that had been running for so long it had become indistinguishable from silence. The ceiling disappeared into the darkness above us. The glowing symbols covered the walls in dense, layered patterns that shifted as we moved, or seemed to shift. The green light playing tricks with peripheral vision, making static carvings look like slow flowing water. Our footsteps made no echo. The space swallowed sound the way it swallowed light, completely, without remainder. Lyra moved through it without looking. Every turn, every threshold, every change in the floor level, she navigated from memory so deep it was indistinguishable from instinct. This was not a place she had discovered. This was a place she had grown up knowing. She brought me to a central chamber, round, perhaps 30 meters across, with a ceiling that finally became visible, domed, covered entirely in symbols that here were not green, but a deep warm gold, pulsing slightly faster than the ones outside. In the center of the chamber floor, a circular depression, perhaps 3 meters wide, perfectly smooth, filled with something that was not quite liquid and not quite light. A substance that moved with the slow purposefulness of deep water, but generated its own illumination, casting the entire chamber in shifting gold and green. I stood at the edge of the depression and looked into it and felt with absolute irrational certainty that it was looking back. "What is this?" I asked. Lyra crouched at the edge of the depression, the gold light catching her white hair and turning it the color of late afternoon sun. She touched the surface, barely, with 2 fingertips, and the light responded, brightened, pulsed once, strongly, like a heartbeat answering another heartbeat. She said something in Kale, long, careful, chosen. The way she spoke when she needed me to understand something important and was frustrated by the limits of what we shared. I caught fragments. Underneath, door, other side. I looked at the pool of moving light, then back at her. "A door," I said slowly. "This is a door." She held my gaze and nodded. We sat beside the pool for a long time, long enough for the gold light to shift through several of its slow cycles, long enough for my legs to remind me that crouching on ancient stone floors had consequences for people my age, long enough for Lyra to decide, piece by careful piece, how much to tell me. What she told me in the fragmented, patient, sometimes circling way of two people building meaning out of incomplete shared language was this: her people, the Kale, had not always lived on Thessera Vex. They had come here generations ago, so many generations that the number had been replaced by the word always in their collective memory, which was its own kind of answer. They had come because of this structure, because of what was inside it, because something, long before them, had left something here that the Kale had decided was worth protecting. The ships, 200 years of wrecked ships, the graveyard that covered half the planet's surface, were not accidents. Not entirely. The predators, the storms, the geological instability, those were real. But the Kale had also been here, watching, making sure that the people who came to Thessera Vex did not find what was underneath it. Not out of malice, out of the specific, exhausting responsibility of being the ones who stayed, the ones who kept the door. I thought about the word she'd added to our vocabulary wall on the night of the storm: sacred. And underneath it, connected to it in ways I was only beginning to trace, the phrase she had taught me that first week that I had been slowly understanding more deeply ever since: the ones who stayed. It wasn't just a category of two, it was a title, a lineage, a thing her people had been on this planet for longer than either of our civilizations had existed. And she just told it to me. A human, a smuggler, Someone who had just crashed here by accident and had every reason and every ability to leave. I looked at her for a long time. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. She looked at the pool of light, at the symbol on the walls, at her own hands resting open on her knees. Then she looked at me and said, in careful, precise human standard, the longest sentence she had ever spoken in my language. "Because you did not leave." We walked back through the jungle in the morning light, which was different now, or I was different, which amounted to the same thing. The same golden shafts through the same ancient canopy, the same soft ground underfoot, the same layered symphony of Thessarian wildlife going about the specific and urgent business of staying alive on a planet that made that difficult. Everything identical, everything changed. Lyra walked beside me rather than ahead of me, which she hadn't done before. A small thing. The kind of small thing that is only small until you notice it, and then it isn't small at all. I was turning over what she had told me, fitting it against everything I had observed in the weeks since the crash, finding the places where it clarified things I hadn't understood, and the places where it opened new questions I hadn't known to ask. The cargo containers, Drevik. Whatever was in those sealed cases that she'd recognized and feared, how did that fit into the structure? The door. 200 years of ships the Kale had quietly discouraging from landing. Someone had known about this planet. Someone had been sending things here, or trying to, for a long time, before Drevik, before my particular bad luck intersected with this particular bad planet. Someone knew about the door. I didn't say any of this to Lyra. Not yet. We didn't have enough shared language for that conversation. And even if we had, I wasn't sure I was ready to have it. Some information needs time to settle before you can do anything useful with it. Instead, I walked beside her through the post-storm jungle, and at some point, I'm not sure exactly when, my hand brushed hers. Not intentional, just a natural consequence of walking close enough together that the occasional contact was inevitable. She didn't move away. Neither did I. We walked the rest of the way back like that, not holding hands, not quite, just close enough that the warmth was real and the choice to remain, it was mutual and unspoken, and, for now, enough. I've seen a lot since then about what it means to be trusted with something sacred. Not the religious sense of the word, though I understand now why the Kale use it. Standing in that chamber with the gold light pulsing slow as a heartbeat and the symbols shifting at the edge of vision. Sacred in the older sense, the sense that means this matters beyond what I can explain. And I am asking you to treat it accordingly. Lyra has been alone on Thessera Vex for 3 years when I crashed here. Her people, a small community, the last of the Kale who had maintained the old responsibility, had been reduced by illness and age and the slow attrition of keeping a secret on a planet that tried to kill you every day. She was the last one young enough and strong enough to continue. She had been keeping the door alone. When she said "because you did not leave," she wasn't just answering my question. She was telling me something about herself, about what the last 3 years had cost her, about what it meant to someone who had been alone with something that enormous for that long, to find another person standing beside her in the jungle one morning who didn't run, didn't exploit, didn't report back to either side of a war that had nothing to do with what was actually important in this corner of the universe. Just stayed. I didn't know yet what was on the other side of that door. I didn't know yet what Dravik's cargo meant, or who had sent it, or what was coming. I knew that somewhere in the deep jungle of a planet nobody survives, there was a chamber filled with gold light that pulsed like a heartbeat. And I knew that the woman who had kept it alone for 3 years had decided, for reasons I was only beginning to deserve, to stop keeping it alone. That felt like enough. For one morning, that felt like more than enough.